Part 1. The Incident. It was supposed to be a simple evening out. Grace Mitchell, a retired Army sergeant and proud black veteran, decided to treat herself to a rare night off. She'd heard about the new upscale restaurant, Haven's Gate, which was renowned for its ambiance and fusion of flavors. Despite the intimidating crowd of polished professionals and high-profile individuals, Grace held her head high, her confident stride reflecting years of discipline and pride. As she entered the restaurant, the host at the entrance gave her a dismissive once-over. She greeted him politely. "Good evening. Reservation for Grace Mitchell." But the host didn't meet her gaze. "Are you sure you have the right place, ma'am?" he asked, barely concealing his skepticism. Grace felt a twinge of discomfort, but brushed it off. "Yes, I made a reservation 3 days ago. It should be under Mitchell." Without another word, the host flipped through his tablet with a drawn-out sigh. After a moment, he muttered, "It's a busy night, and we're fully booked. You'll have to wait until there's availability." Grace's eyes narrowed. "I have a reservation," she repeated, her voice steady but firm. The host exhaled, looked around the bustling dining room, and then back at her. "Reservations sometimes fall through. I'm sure you understand," he said dismissively. Grace couldn't help but notice the quick glance he cast over her clothes, which were simple yet dignified, and the look he exchanged with a passing server. She waited in the lounge area, her pride masking the slow burn of anger bubbling inside. For nearly 30 minutes, she sat in silence, watching other patrons, all dressed in expensive attire and exuding wealth, receive prompt, warm welcomes. She saw several groups, all of whom had arrived after her, seated without delay. And each time the host seemed to glance in her direction, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. When she finally approached him again, her patience fraying, the host barely spared her a glance. "We're still waiting on a table, Ms. Mitchell." "Is that so?" Grace said, her calm composure beginning to crack. "Because I've seen at least a dozen people who walked in after me get seated." The host shrugged. "We have different sections and different priorities," he said coolly. Then, with a look that couldn't be mistaken for anything but disdain, he added, "Perhaps this just isn't the place for everyone." The words sliced through the air, cutting Grace's patience to the core. For a moment, she felt every part of her military discipline trying to maintain control, but the sting of his implication simmered deep within. She gave him one last look, something powerful and unspoken flashing in her eyes, and without another word, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, her heart heavy, but her resolve strengthening. Part 2. The Plan. Grace spent the night replaying the humiliating encounter in her mind. It wasn't the first time she had faced discrimination, but something about this experience struck deeper. For years, she had served her country with loyalty and discipline, enduring grueling conditions and sacrifices few could imagine. Yet here, at a simple restaurant, she was disregarded because of assumptions rooted in prejudice. The next morning, Grace woke up with a clarity that sharpened her frustration into purpose. She wasn't going to let the incident at Haven's Gate slide. They needed to learn that respect wasn't determined by appearance or status, and that every person who walked through their doors deserved dignity. But she knew she wanted to do this thoughtfully, not in anger, to make a statement that would resonate. She spent the next few days meticulously researching the restaurant's management, ownership, and clientele. As she dug deeper, she discovered that Haven's Gate prided itself on exclusivity, curating its image as a hotspot for high society individuals. However, Grace also found that they frequently partnered with local businesses for charity dinners, networking events, and special causes. With each bit of information, a plan started to form. Grace wasn't just any patron. She was a decorated veteran and a well-known advocate within her community. She had connections with influential business leaders, former military colleagues, and a network of local organizations that admired her strength and resilience. All she needed to do was make a few calls. The first call was to an old friend, Lisa Owens, who ran a popular news blog. Lisa had a knack for uncovering injustice, and Grace knew she'd be interested in highlighting the story. Without going into too much detail, Grace shared what happened, asking Lisa to keep an eye on things in the coming weeks. Next, Grace reached out to friends within the military community who worked with veterans support programs. She offered to organize a charity event benefiting homeless veterans, proposing Haven's Gate as the venue. Her friends were intrigued but cautious, knowing how selective the restaurant was. Grace reassured them that she would handle the logistics and that the event would be memorable for both the patrons and those the charity served. To secure the event, Grace approached Haven's Gate under a different guise. She drafted an official proposal on behalf of the Veterans Organization, pitching a high-profile charity dinner that would bring positive attention to the restaurant. She framed it as an opportunity for the restaurant to showcase its community support, hinting at the media coverage and positive public relations they would receive. The restaurant's management, drawn by the allure of prestigious press and community goodwill, quickly agreed to the idea. The irony wasn't lost on Grace, and she took satisfaction in knowing that soon the same staff who had dismissed her would be working tirelessly to prepare for an event championed by someone they had treated with disdain. The date was set, and Grace was ready. The guest list consisted of prominent figures from the community, military veterans, and local advocates. She also invited a few key media outlets, knowing the story would catch fire when the truth came to light. Part 3. The Charity Event and the Grand Reveal. As the date of the charity event approached, Grace had transformed the restaurant into an elegant venue, unlike anything its patrons had ever seen. Soft music filled the air, and tables were adorned with fresh lilies and candles. Grace had spared no expense in making sure the event was both warm and welcoming, far removed from the cold experience she'd had weeks before. The guests arrived one by one, many of them veterans and their families, thrilled to be part of an event dedicated to honoring them. Some who had struggled financially or emotionally since returning home felt a renewed sense of hope upon walking into such a welcoming space. Grace had arranged for each veteran in attendance to be gifted with a small token of appreciation, a custom-made coin inscribed with bravery, resilience, honor. It was a reminder of their strength and service, one she knew they would carry close. As the event went on, Grace noticed Paul, the manager who had humiliated her, standing at the side of the room, overseeing the operations with a strained look. He seemed nervous, likely wondering why a charity event for veterans was taking place at his restaurant. Unbeknownst to him, this was the night he would learn who she truly was. When the time came for speeches, the restaurant quieted down, and Grace took to the stage, her presence commanding attention. Her demeanor was poised yet powerful as she shared her story of struggle, resilience, and the bond of brotherhood and sisterhood shared by all veterans. She spoke directly to the veterans in the room, thanking them for their sacrifices and reinforcing how valued they were. Finally, she took a deep breath and, with a small smile, shared the incident that had brought her to this point, the night she was humiliated in that very restaurant. She didn't mention Paul's name, but described the pain of being disregarded despite her service. Paul's face went pale as he realized who Grace was talking about. He looked down, shifting uncomfortably. knowing that Grace's words would impact him deeply. The guests, including reporters who had been invited to cover the event, glanced at Paul, slowly piecing together the story. Without addressing him directly, Grace turned her attention back to the crowd and concluded, "Tonight isn't just about honoring veterans. It's about reminding everyone that dignity and respect are owed to all people, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. I hope that moving forward, we can create a world where this message resonates in every space, from boardrooms to restaurants." Applause erupted as Grace stepped down from the stage, and many approached her, thanking her for her bravery and strength. Paul, however, seemed frozen, staring down at his shoes, overwhelmed by a mixture of shame and regret. Part 4. Paul's Apology and Grace's Legacy. The next morning, Paul arrived at work early, unable to shake the impact of Grace's speech. He had spent a sleepless night reflecting on his actions, realizing how blind he had been to her humanity and accomplishments. The shame weighed heavily on him, but he also recognized an opportunity to make things right. If not fully, then at least as much as he could. When Grace arrived later in the morning, Paul hesitantly approached her, his hands slightly trembling. "Ms. Grace, may I speak with you?" Grace raised an eyebrow, maintaining her calm composure. "Go ahead." Paul took a deep breath. I'm truly sorry for the way I treated you that night. I had no right to judge you or make assumptions. I can't imagine the strength it took to stand there, knowing what you've accomplished, and yet being spoken down to." He paused, gathering his courage. "I promise you, I've learned my lesson. I've already spoken to the staff, and we're all committed to treating every person who walks through these doors with the respect they deserve." Grace studied him for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. She knew his remorse was genuine, but she also understood the importance of this moment, not just for her, but for others like her. "I appreciate your apology, Paul," she finally said. "I believe everyone deserves a second chance, as long as they're willing to grow." Paul nodded, visibly relieved, and extended his hand. Grace accepted it with a firm shake, a small smile tugging at her lips. She hoped this would mark a new chapter, not just for the restaurant, but for everyone who heard her story. Part 5. Grace's Lasting Impact. In the weeks that followed, Grace continued her work, receiving letters and messages from veterans and civilians alike, all inspired by her story. Her charity grew, attracting support from influential figures moved by her resilience and vision. More restaurants reached out, offering to host similar events to honor veterans, and her foundation quickly became a powerful advocate for underrepresented heroes in the community. Meanwhile, Paul's restaurant saw a shift as well. His staff treated every guest with newfound respect and warmth, and patrons who had read about Grace's story came in to support the transformed establishment. The incident, which could have been a humiliating memory for Grace, became a source of empowerment and change. Through her strength and refusal to be silenced, Grace had turned a painful moment into a movement, inspiring others to see people for who they truly were, beyond uniforms, skin color, or status. And as she continued to walk forward, head held high, Grace knew she had created a legacy that would ripple far beyond that night in the restaurant, making her proud not only as a veteran, but as a woman who stood up for dignity and justice,